My name is Emma Clark. I'm 26 years old, and I just discovered my entire family has been secretly planning to humiliate me in front of everyone at our annual Christmas dinner. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I should probably start by explaining my family. The Clarks aren't just wealthy, they're Connecticut old money wealthy. The kind of family where your great-great-grandfather's portrait hangs in the Yale Club and everyone assumes you'll follow the predetermined path. Prestigious university, corporate law or finance, marriage to someone from an equally acceptable family, and producing the next generation of Clarks to continue the tradition. I broke that mold 6 years ago when I dropped out of Yale Law School after my first semester. Not because I couldn't handle it, I had a perfect GPA, but because I realized I didn't want to spend my life defending corporations that poisoned water supplies or helping rich people avoid taxes. My father, Richard Clark III, didn't speak to me for 2 years. My mother, Catherine, cried and told all her friends I was finding myself. My older brother, Marcus, the golden child who made partner at his law firm by 32, just shook his head with that condescending smile I'd learned to hate. The thing is, I didn't just drop out to spite them. I had a plan. While they assumed I was wasting my life, I was building something they couldn't understand because they never bothered to ask. I'd enrolled in a completely different kind of program, one focused on digital forensics and cybersecurity. Turns out I had a natural talent for finding things people wanted to keep hidden. By 23, I had my certifications. By 24, I was consulting for a private investigation firm. By 25, I'd helped crack 2 major corporate fraud cases that made national news, though my name was never mentioned publicly. That's how the business works. We're the invisible ones who find the truth. But to my family, I was just Emma, the disappointment. The one who worked some vague computer job and lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn instead of a brownstone in the Upper East Side. The one who showed up to family events in clothes from Target instead of Bergdorf Goodman. The one who was still single while Marcus had married Bethany. A neurosurgeon whose family owned half of Martha's Vineyard. Every year, our Christmas gathering was the same performance. 40 people crammed into my parents' Greenwich estate, everyone in their designer clothes, drinking expensive wine and pretending to enjoy each other's company. I'd learned to endure it, to smile through the passive-aggressive comments, to ignore the looks of pity when someone asked what I was doing with my life. This year started like all the others. 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother called with her usual request that I dress appropriately and try to make conversation with eligible men. I agreed, like I always did, already mentally preparing myself for 8 hours of subtle humiliation. But then, 2 weeks before Christmas, something changed. I was at a coffee shop in Manhattan, working on a case involving insurance fraud, when I noticed a familiar face 3 tables away. It was my cousin Jennifer, talking animatedly with someone I didn't recognize. I wouldn't have paid attention, except that I heard my name. "Emma's going to die when it happens," Jennifer said, loud enough that I could hear every word. "Your mother is absolutely brilliant, Catherine. This is going to be legendary." I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed something to her companion, both of them laughing. I couldn't see the screen, but the malice in their expressions told me everything I needed to know. I'm good at what I do, because I pay attention to details other people miss. I noticed Jennifer glance around nervously before putting her phone away. I noticed how she lowered her voice when she mentioned the video presentation. I noticed how she kept saying Christmas dinner with emphasis, like it was a specific moment they were targeting. I kept working on my laptop, but my mind was racing. Whatever they were planning, it was coordinated. It involved my mother, and it was designed to humiliate me in front of the entire family. That night, I did what I do best. I investigated. Jennifer's digital security was laughable. She used the same password for everything, her mother's maiden name plus her birth year. It took me exactly 12 minutes to access her email account, and what I found there made my blood run cold. The email thread was titled, Operation Clark Christmas Surprise. It had started 6 months earlier, right after last year's Christmas dinner. The participants included my mother, my brother Marcus, Marcus's wife Bethany, Jennifer, my Aunt Patricia, and even my father, though he seemed less enthusiastic in his responses. I read through every single message, my anger building with each line. The plan was simple and cruel. They were going to create a "this is your lifestyle" presentation about me, supposedly to celebrate my accomplishments, but actually designed to showcase every failure, every embarrassment, every moment that proved I was the family disappointment. They'd been collecting photos, old social media posts, even reaching out to people from my past to get embarrassing stories. The worst part? They'd contacted my ex-boyfriend from college, David, the one who'd cheated on me with my roommate. They'd actually paid him $500 to record a video talking about our relationship, and from the email preview, he'd been more than happy to share humiliating, intimate details. My mother's emails were particularly vicious. "This is for her own good," she wrote. "Emma needs to understand that her choices have consequences. If we can shock her into realizing how far she's fallen, maybe she'll finally grow up and rejoin the family properly." Marcus's contributions were more practical but equally cruel. He'd created a PowerPoint comparing my life to his, a literal side-by-side of our achievements. His side showed his partnership at the firm, his house in Connecticut, his beautiful wife, his 2 perfect children. My side showed my tiny apartment, my vague employment, my failure to launch. They'd even created fake award certificates. Most likely to disappoint her parents. Biggest waste of a Yale education. Family member most likely to die alone with cats. I sat in my apartment, staring at my screen, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, focused rage. But I'm not the kind of person who acts on emotion. I'm the kind who plans, the kind who investigates, the kind who finds the truth and uses it. If they wanted to embarrass me in front of the family, fine. But I was going to make sure that Christmas dinner became a night they'd never forget, for very different reasons. I spent the next week doing what I'm best at, digging, and what I found was so much worse than I'd imagined. It started with Marcus, my perfect older brother, the family golden child, the successful attorney. I'd always assumed his success was legitimate, but something in the way he'd thrown himself into this humiliation plan made me suspicious. People who are truly secure don't need to tear others down so viciously. I started with his firm's public records, then moved to financial databases I had access to through my work. What I found was a pattern of billing irregularities. Marcus had been padding his hours for years, charging clients for work that was never done. But that was just the beginning. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. 3 years ago, Marcus had been assigned to defend a pharmaceutical company in a class action lawsuit. The plaintiffs were families whose children had been harmed by a contaminated medication. Marcus's firm had represented the pharmaceutical company, and the case had been settled quietly out of court. What wasn't public was that Marcus had personally suppressed evidence, hiding test results that proved the company knew about the contamination months before they issued a recall. I found the emails on a backup server that his firm hadn't properly secured. Marcus had literally written, "If these documents become public, we lose everything. Make them disappear." Those children had suffered permanent neurological damage. Some had died, and my brother had helped the company responsible avoid accountability, all while billing them $3 million in legal fees. But Marcus wasn't the only one with secrets. My mother, Catherine, had always presented herself as the perfect society wife. She sat on the boards of 3 charities, hosted fundraisers, and was constantly photographed at galas supporting various causes. Her favorite was the Greenwich Youth Foundation, which supposedly provided scholarships to underprivileged children. I accessed the foundation's financial records through public tax documents, but I wanted more detail, so I used some of the techniques that made me good at my job. What I discovered was that the Greenwich Youth Foundation was essentially a slush fund. Of the $2 million donated each year, only about 15% actually went to scholarships. The rest was classified as administrative costs and event expenses. My mother was paying herself a salary of $250,000 as executive director, a position that seemed to involve planning 4 charity galas a year. Her sister Patricia, who was also part of the humiliation plan, was the development director at $150,000 annually. They were taking money meant for underprivileged children and using it to fund their lifestyles. But the evidence I found went deeper. My mother had been using foundation funds to pay for personal expenses. Her designer clothes? Foundation credit card, classified as professional wardrobe for fundraising events. Her spa treatments? Wellness expenses for executive health. Even her car, a Mercedes S-Class, was leased through the foundation. I documented everything, creating a spreadsheet that tracked every fraudulent expense over 5 years. The total was staggering. Over $400,000 in personal expenses charged to a charity. Then there was Bethany, Marcus's perfect wife, the neurosurgeon, the brilliant doctor everyone admired. I'd always wondered why someone that successful seemed to have so much free time for family drama. So I checked. Bethany's medical license had been suspended 8 months ago, following an investigation into surgical complications. 3 patients had suffered serious injuries during procedures she'd performed, and the medical board had found evidence of substance abuse. She'd been operating while impaired. The suspension was temporary, pending completion of a rehabilitation program, but Bethany hadn't told anyone in the family. As far as they knew, she was still the successful neurosurgeon, still going to the hospital every day. In reality, she was going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings and therapy sessions. I felt a twinge of sympathy for her until I read her contributions to the humiliation emails. She'd been particularly enthusiastic about the idea of mocking my career, writing, "At least when Emma fails, she doesn't risk killing anyone." The hypocrisy was stunning. My father was harder to investigate. Richard Clark III had built his reputation on being above reproach. But I'd learned that the people who appear most perfect often have the most to hide. I started with his company, Clark Investment Management. Publicly, it was a successful hedge fund that managed money for high-net-worth individuals. I accessed some financial databases through connections I'd made in my work, being very careful to stay within legal boundaries. What I found was a pattern of insider trading that had somehow avoided SEC detection. My father had been using information from his country club friends, other executives who casually mentioned upcoming mergers or acquisitions during golf games, to make strategic investments just before major announcements. It wasn't the obvious, get-caught-immediately kind of insider trading. It was subtle, sophisticated, and carefully structured to avoid detection. But it was still illegal. And I had the trade records to prove it, along with calendar entries that showed my father meeting with these executives just days before suspiciously well-timed investments. The total profit from these trades over the past decade? Approximately $43 million. Even Jennifer, my cousin who I'd overheard at the coffee shop, had her secrets. She'd been embezzling from her employer, a nonprofit that helped homeless veterans. Small amounts, a few $100s at a time, but over 3 years it had added up to almost $90,000. She'd been using the money to fund a gambling addiction that she'd hidden from everyone. I compiled everything into organized files, each family member getting their own folder with meticulously documented evidence. Bank records, emails, photographs, financial statements, legal documents. Everything anyone would need to understand exactly what these people had been doing while they sat in judgment of me. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought I was the failure, the embarrassment, the one who'd wasted her potential. Meanwhile, they were frauds, criminals, and hypocrites who'd been getting away with it because of their money and connections. But I wasn't ready to use this information yet. I needed to understand their plan completely, to let them set up their humiliation so that my response would be perfectly timed. I continued monitoring their emails. The plan was becoming more elaborate. They'd hired a professional videographer to create the presentation. They'd rented a projector and screen. They'd even arranged the seating to ensure I'd be in the front of the room, unable to escape when they started the presentation. My mother had invited extra guests this year, people specifically chosen to witness my humiliation, old family friends who'd known me since childhood, several of my parents' most important business associates, even some people from my high school, people I hadn't seen in years, contacted through Facebook with vague invitations to catch up at the Clark Christmas dinner. They were creating an audience for my destruction. The presentation was scheduled to happen right after dinner, before dessert. Marcus was going to give a short speech about family and celebrating each other, and then they'd dim the lights and start the video. I read the script Marcus had written. It began with baby photos of me, accompanied by narration about how much potential I'd had. Then it would chronicle my descent, as he called it, dropping out of Yale, my string of failed relationships, my inability to maintain employment, my stubborn refusal to accept help from the family. The ex-boyfriend's video was the centerpiece, a 5-minute humiliation that included details about our sex life, my insecurities, and his theory that I'd never been able to handle real intimacy. They'd edited it with photos of me from college, including some I'd never wanted anyone to see. Photos from a particularly bad phase where I'd gained weight from stress. The finale was Marcus's comparison presentation, ending with a call for me to commit to change and accept the family's help in getting my life back on track. My mother was then going to present me with brochures for therapists and life coaches, all arranged in advance. It was psychological warfare, designed to break me down in front of everyone I'd ever known. As I read through their plans, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about exposing the truth. These people had been hiding behind their money and status for years, judging others while being far worse than anyone they looked down upon. They'd picked the wrong target. I spent the next week preparing my response. I created my own presentation, carefully organized and documented. I made copies of everything, stored in multiple secure locations. I consulted with a lawyer to ensure that everything I was planning was legal. I even spoke with a journalist I'd worked with on a previous case, someone who specialized in exposing wealthy corruption, and gave her everything as a backup. If something happened to me, if my family somehow managed to destroy the evidence I was bringing to dinner, she had instructions to publish everything. I also did something else. I hired my own videographer, someone professional, someone who could document everything that happened at that Christmas dinner. I positioned them as a friend who was coming to meet my family, someone who just happened to be interested in filming family gatherings for a documentary project. My family, so focused on their own plans, barely questioned it. The days before Christmas were surreal. My mother called multiple times with last-minute instructions about what to wear and when to arrive. Marcus sent me a text saying he was really looking forward to celebrating family this year. And Jennifer posted on Facebook about how excited she was for the Clark Christmas dinner, tagging me with a string of heart emojis. They had no idea what was coming. Christmas Eve, I didn't sleep. I went through everything one more time, making sure every document was in order. Every piece of evidence was accessible. Every backup was secure. I thought about backing out, about just not showing up, about letting them have their moment and cutting them out of my life forever. But that would have been the easy way out, and it wouldn't have stopped them from hurting other people. Marcus would keep suppressing evidence for corporations that harmed people. My mother would keep stealing from charity. Bethany would eventually get her license back and return to operating on patients. My father would keep making illegal trades. Jennifer would keep embezzling. No, this needed to happen. Not just for me, but for everyone they'd hurt, and everyone they would hurt in the future. Christmas Day arrived clear and cold. I dressed carefully, not in the designer outfit my mother had requested, but in a simple black dress and boots. Professional. Serious. I looked like what I was, someone who had work to do. I arrived at my parents' estate at exactly 4 p.m., the time specified in my mother's invitation. The house was decorated like something from a magazine, white lights and greenery everywhere, a massive tree in the entrance hall. Catering staff moved through the rooms with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The other guests were already there, about 50 people total, more than usual. I recognized most of them. Family members, family friends, business associates, and scattered throughout the crowd, people from my past who'd been invited specifically to witness my humiliation. My mother greeted me at the door with air kisses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emma, darling, you made it." "And who is this?" She looked at James, my videographer, with polite curiosity. "This is James Patterson," I said smoothly. "He's a documentary filmmaker I've been working with. He's doing a project on American family traditions, and I thought our Christmas dinner would be perfect. I hope you don't mind that I invited him." I saw the brief flash of annoyance in my mother's eyes, but she was too well bred to refuse in front of other guests. Of course. How wonderful. Welcome, James. She turned back to me, her voice dropping slightly. We have some special surprises planned for tonight, darling. I think you're going to be very touched. I'm sure I will be, I said. I moved through the crowd, making small talk, accepting champagne I didn't drink, smiling at people who looked at me with barely concealed pity or curiosity. I could feel the anticipation in the room. Some of these people knew what was coming, or at least suspected it. The way they looked at me, the careful way they asked questions about my life, the slight edge of voyeuristic excitement in their voices. Marcus found me near the fireplace. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit and his most condescending smile. Emma, good to see you. Big night tonight. I'm sure it will be, I said. We're all really proud of you, you know, he said, his tone making it clear this was the opposite of true. Coming here, facing the family, even after everything. That takes courage. Does it? Not everyone could handle what we have planned, but I think it's going to be good for you. Sometimes we need hard truths to grow. I looked at my brother, this man who'd helped a corporation escape accountability for hurting children, and I smiled. You're absolutely right, Marcus. Sometimes we do need hard truths. He looked momentarily confused by my agreement, but then Bethany called him away to meet some guests. Dinner was announced at 6. We moved into the formal dining room, where my mother had outdone herself with the decorations. The table seated 50, set with china that had been in the family for generations, crystal that caught the light from the chandelier above. I was seated, as I'd expected, at the center of one side of the table, perfectly positioned to be the focus of attention. James, my videographer, was set up in the corner with his camera, which everyone seemed to accept as part of his documentary project. The meal was elaborate. Oysters, lobster bisque, filet mignon, roasted vegetables, all paired with expensive wines. The conversation was loud and festive, everyone performing their roles in this family theater. I ate slowly, watching, waiting. My mother kept glancing at her watch. Marcus was texting someone under the table. Jennifer couldn't stop grinning. The anticipation was building. Finally, as the servers began clearing the dinner plates, my mother stood up and tapped her wine glass with a fork. The room fell silent. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Christmas has always been about family, about coming together to celebrate and support each other. She paused, her eyes finding me across the table. This year we wanted to do something special. We wanted to take a moment to recognize someone who is very dear to us, someone who has been on quite a journey over the past few years. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. Emma, sweetheart, this is for you. The lights dimmed. A screen descended from the ceiling at the end of the room. A projector hummed to life. Marcus stood up, taking over the presentation. We put together a little retrospective of Emma's life, a celebration of who she is and where she's going. The video began. Baby photos, like I'd expected, with sentimental music. My childhood, my teenage years. Then the tone shifted. The music became slightly mocking. Photos of me at Yale, looking stressed and tired. Then a photo of the day I dropped out, looking defeated. Emma had so much potential, Marcus's voiceover said. But somewhere along the way, she lost sight of what matters. The photos continued. My small apartment, taken from the outside, looking run down in the harsh daylight. Screenshots of my LinkedIn profile, highlighting my vague job description. Photos of me at previous family gatherings, deliberately chosen to make me look awkward and out of place. Then came the relationship segment. My ex-boyfriends, including David, whose face appeared on the screen with a smirk. Emma and I dated for 2 years, his recorded voice said. She was always so insecure, so needy. She couldn't handle that I needed space. When she found out about me and her roommate, she had a complete breakdown. I think she never really grew up, you know? She's still that scared little girl who can't handle real life. Around the table, people were uncomfortable but watching. This was crueler than they'd expected, but they couldn't look away. The video continued with Marcus's comparison presentation. His accomplishments next to my failures. His house, his family, his success. all contrasted with my disappointing choices. The finale was coming, the part where my mother was going to present me with therapy brochures, and they were all going to offer their concerned suggestions for fixing my life. But before we got there, before Marcus could launch into his prepared speech about family intervention, I stood up. The video paused. Everyone looked at me. "Thank you for that," I said, my voice steady and clear. That was very illuminating. I particularly enjoyed the creative editing and the phone call with my ex-boyfriend. $500 well spent, right, Marcus? His face went pale. But since we're sharing presentations tonight, since we're all being so honest with each other, I thought I'd contribute something too. I pulled out a USB drive from my purse. "James, could you switch the input to my drive?" My mother stood up. "Emma, this isn't the time." "Actually, Mom, it's the perfect time. You went to so much effort to bring everyone here tonight. All these witnesses. It would be a shame to waste the opportunity." I walked to the laptop, controlling the projector, and inserted my drive. "You wanted to show everyone who I really am. Well, let me show everyone who you really are." The screen changed. My presentation appeared. The title slide was simple: The Truth About the Clark Family. "Let's start with you, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room. "My successful lawyer brother, tell me, does your firm know that you've been padding your billable hours for the past 6 years?" The first document appeared on screen. Billing records, highlighted to show the discrepancies. Time entries for work that had never been done. Charges to clients for hours that didn't exist. Marcus stood up. "This is insane. You can't—" "I can, and I am. But that's not even the worst part." I clicked to the next slide. "This is about the Meridian Pharmaceutical case. Remember that one, Marcus? The class action lawsuit where children were harmed by contaminated medication?" The emails appeared on screen. Marcus's words preserved forever. "Make them disappear." Around the table, people were reading, their expressions changing from confusion to horror. "You suppressed evidence that would have proven the company knew about the contamination. Children died, Marcus. And you helped the people responsible avoid justice for $3 million in legal fees." "This is privileged information," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "This is attorney-client privilege. You can't—" "Actually, attorney-client privilege doesn't apply to communications in furtherance of a crime, and obstruction of justice is definitely a crime." I looked at him directly. "I've already provided copies of everything to the appropriate authorities. The State Bar will be very interested." Marcus sat down heavily. Bethany reached for his hand, but I wasn't done. "Speaking of Bethany," I said, turning to my sister-in-law, "how's the medical practice going?" "Oh wait, that's right. You don't have one anymore." Bethany's face went white. The next slide showed her medical license suspension notice. The details of the investigation. The surgical complications caused by her impairment. 3 patients suffered serious injuries because you were operating while under the influence, I said. And you've been lying to this entire family about it for 8 months. Every time someone asked about work, you made up stories about surgeries you weren't performing and patients you weren't seeing. Bethany stood up and ran from the room. Marcus followed her, but I kept going. "Mom, let's talk about your charity work." I clicked to the next section. "The Greenwich Youth Foundation is such a worthy cause. Scholarships for underprivileged children. Except that's not really what it is it?" The financial records appeared on screen. The salary payments. The expense reports. Every fraudulent charge laid out in excruciating detail. My mother's face was the color of ash. "Emma, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've been stealing from a charity. You and Aunt Patricia have been paying yourselves hundreds of thousands of dollars while only 15% of donations actually help children. And you've been using foundation funds to buy designer clothes, spa treatments, and luxury cars. $400,000 over 5 years, Mom. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud." "You ungrateful—" my mother started, but I cut her off. "I'm not finished. Dad, let's talk about Clark Investment Management." My father, who'd been silent through all of this, looked at me with something like fear. The trading records appeared. The pattern of insider trades. The meetings with executives followed by suspiciously well-timed investments. $43 million in illegal profits, I said. Built on information you weren't supposed to have. The SEC is going to be very interested in these records. My father stood up slowly. Emma, you need to stop this right now. Why? You didn't stop when you were planning to humiliate me. You didn't stop when you were committing securities fraud. Why should I stop now? The room was in chaos. People were talking loudly, some standing up, some pulling out their phones. The carefully orchestrated Christmas dinner had become something else entirely. And Jennifer? I said, looking at my cousin who was trying to edge toward the exit. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the $90,000 you stole from a veterans charity to feed your gambling addiction? Her financial records appeared on screen. The pattern of small thefts, the casino records showing where the money went. Jennifer ran from the room, followed by Aunt Patricia, who was shouting something I couldn't hear over the noise. I stood at the front of the room, looking at the chaos I'd created, and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but relief. The truth was out. All of it. You wanted to show everyone who I am, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. You wanted to prove that I'm the failure, the disappointment, the one who doesn't measure up to the Clark family standards. I looked around the room at all the shocked faces, the family friends and business associates who were seeing my family in a completely new light. But I'm not the failure here. I'm the only one in this family who's been living honestly. Yes, I dropped out of Yale Law because I didn't want to become someone like Marcus, someone who'd help corporations hurt people for money. Yes, I live in a small apartment in Brooklyn because I'd rather pay my own way than steal from charities like Mom. Yes, I'm still single because I'd rather be alone than be with someone who enables criminal behavior like Bethany. I pulled out a folder from my bag and held it up. Everything I've shown you tonight is documented and backed up in multiple locations. I've already provided copies to law enforcement, regulatory agencies, and a journalist who specializes in exposing corruption. I've also given copies to lawyers representing people you've hurt, the families in the Meridian Pharmaceutical case, the veterans your charity was supposed to help. All of them. My mother found her voice. You've destroyed this family. No, I said firmly. You destroyed this family when you decided that money and status were more important than integrity. When you decided that keeping up appearances mattered more than actually being good people. I just revealed what was already true. My father stepped forward. If you publish any of this, we'll sue you for everything you have. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Go ahead and try. Everything I've gathered is either public record or legally obtained. And I've been very careful to stay within the bounds of the law, which is more than any of you can say. I paused. Also, I don't have anything for you to take. Remember? I'm the failure with the small apartment and the computer job. What are you going to sue me for? My secondhand furniture? I started packing up my laptop. James has been recording everything tonight. This entire dinner, including your attempt to humiliate me and my response. That footage will be stored securely, and if anyone in this family tries to retaliate against me or interfere with the legal proceedings that are about to begin, it will be released publicly. I looked at my mother. You wanted to force me to change, to become more like you. But I'd rather die alone with cats, as you so elegantly put it, than become anything like any of you. I picked up my bag and started walking toward the door. James packed up his camera and followed me. As I passed my father, he grabbed my arm. Emma, please. We can fix this. We can make this right. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. You had years to make it right, Dad. Years to be honest, to treat people fairly, to actually be the upstanding family you pretended to be. You chose not to, and now you have to face the consequences. I pulled my arm free and walked out of the dining room, through the decorated entrance hall with its perfect tree and white lights, and out the front door into the cold December night. James was right behind me. That was intense, he said as we walked to our cars. Thanks for recording everything. You really gave them a gift they'll remember forever. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. That was the point. I drove back to my small Brooklyn apartment, the one my family had mocked, and I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone was already blowing up with calls and texts from family members, but I ignored them all. The next day, I met with the lawyer I'd consulted during my preparation. "Everything is filed," she told me. "The state bar has the information about your brother. The Attorney General has the charity fraud evidence. The SEC has the trading records. And I've been contacted by lawyers representing the Meridian Pharmaceutical plaintiffs. They want to reopen the case." "Good," I said. Over the following weeks, I watched as everything unfolded exactly as I'd planned. Marcus was suspended from practicing law pending investigation. The state bar opened a formal inquiry into his conduct in the Meridian case. His firm, trying to distance themselves from the scandal, placed him on indefinite leave. Bethany's medical license suspension was extended after the revelation that she'd been lying to her rehabilitation counselors about her sobriety. Her medical career was effectively over. My mother and Aunt Patricia were forced to resign from the Greenwich Youth Foundation. The charity's board launched a full audit, and the district attorney opened a fraud investigation. They were looking at serious criminal charges and the possibility of having to repay hundreds of thousands of dollars. My father faced an SEC investigation into his trading practices. His hedge fund was frozen while investigators went through every transaction. Several of his largest clients withdrew their money, and his reputation in the financial community was destroyed. Jennifer was fired from her job and faced embezzlement charges. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to community service and restitution. The journalist I'd given everything to published a comprehensive exposé that went viral. The headline was, "The Perfect Family's Perfect Fraud: How Connecticut's Elite Clark Family Built Their Empire on Lies and Corruption." It detailed everything: the suppressed evidence, the charity fraud, the insider trading, all of it. My family became infamous overnight, not for their success and status, but for their hypocrisy and crimes. I received hundreds of messages on social media. Some were from people who'd known my family and were shocked. Some were from people who'd been hurt by my family's actions and were grateful for the exposure. Some were from journalists wanting interviews. I declined most of the interview requests, but I did agree to speak with a few reporters who were covering specific aspects of the story. I wanted to make sure that the people my family had hurt, particularly the families in the Meridian Pharmaceutical case, had a voice. One of those families reached out to me directly. The mother of a little girl who'd suffered brain damage from the contaminated medication. "Thank you," she wrote. "We thought justice would never come. Because of you, we have a chance to reopen the case. We have a chance to hold them accountable." That message meant more to me than anything else. This wasn't just about revenge or exposing hypocrisy. It was about giving victims a chance at justice. A few months after Christmas, I was contacted by a major investigation firm in Manhattan. They'd been following the Clark family case and were impressed with the quality of my research and documentation. They offered me a senior position, a significant raise, and the chance to work on major corporate fraud cases. I accepted. Turns out, being the person who exposed a prominent family's corruption is excellent for your career when you work in digital forensics. My personal life changed too. Without the weight of my family's judgment and expectations, I felt free to be myself. I started dating someone I met through work, another investigator who understood what I did and why it mattered. It wasn't serious yet, but it was honest, and that was more than I'd ever had before. I moved to a bigger apartment, still in Brooklyn, but nicer. I could afford it now with my new salary. I adopted a cat, partly because I genuinely wanted one, and partly because of the irony of my mother's "die alone with cats" comment. I named him Justice. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, I received a letter from my mother. It was handwritten, which was unusual for her. She usually communicated through carefully crafted emails or texts. "Emma," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. You were right about everything. We had become so focused on appearances, on maintaining our status, that we lost sight of what actually matters. We hurt people. We broke laws. We destroyed the lives of people who trusted us. And we were about to hurt you, our own daughter, our own sister, in the cruelest way possible, just to make ourselves feel superior. I will spend the rest of my life regretting that night, not because you exposed us, but because we gave you reason to. I'm pleading guilty to the fraud charges. I'm going to prison, probably for several years. Before I go, I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Not for your job or your accomplishments, though those are impressive. I'm proud that you had the courage to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost you your family. You're the only one of us who truly understood what integrity means. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it. I love you. Mom. I read the letter 3 times. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift in my chest, some small piece of the anger dissolving. I didn't write back immediately. Maybe I would someday. Maybe I wouldn't. But I kept the letter. Marcus also reached out, though his approach was different. He called from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, his voice was rough, like he'd been crying or drinking or both. I lost everything, Emma. My career, my marriage, my house. Bethany left me. She said she couldn't be with someone who reminds her of her own failures. The kids barely talk to me. I'm living in a rental apartment and working as a paralegal because no law firm will touch me. I waited, not sure what response he expected. I deserved it, he continued. All of it. What I did to those families, suppressing that evidence, it was unforgivable. I told myself it was just business, just doing my job. But that was bullshit. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I did it anyway because the money was good, and it made me feel powerful. Why are you calling me, Marcus? Because you're the only one who had the guts to tell the truth. Everyone else in this family, we were all living these elaborate lies, and we'd convinced ourselves they were true. You saw through all of it. He paused. I'm testifying in the Meridian case. The plaintiff's lawyers contacted me, and I'm going to tell them everything. About the suppressed evidence, about the company's knowledge of the contamination. All of it. It won't undo what I did, but maybe it will help those families get justice. That's good, Marcus. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that what you did, as much as it destroyed everything, it was the right thing. And I'm sorry. For everything. For being part of that plan to humiliate you. For looking down on you all these years. For being too arrogant to see that you were the only one of us living with any integrity. After he hung up, I sat in my apartment with Justice purring on my lap, and I thought about family, about truth, about the cost of doing the right thing. I'd lost my family. On paper, I was more alone than I'd ever been. But I wasn't lonely. I had friends, real friends who knew who I actually was. I had work that mattered. I had a cat who loved me. I had my integrity. And I had the knowledge that I'd helped people get justice. The Meridian Pharmaceutical case was reopened, and with Marcus's testimony, the families had a real chance at winning. The Greenwich Youth Foundation was restructured under new leadership and was actually helping children now. The veterans organization Jennifer had stolen from received restitution and implemented new financial controls. The damage my family had done couldn't be completely undone, but at least they'd been stopped from doing more. A year after that Christmas dinner, I was invited to speak at a conference on digital forensics and corporate investigation. The organizers wanted me to talk about the Clark family case and the importance of ethical investigation practices. I almost declined. I didn't particularly want to relive that night or discuss my family's crimes publicly. But then, I thought about all the people who might be helped by understanding how to uncover corporate fraud, how to document evidence properly, how to expose corruption while staying within legal boundaries. So I accepted. The conference was in Chicago, at a major hotel downtown. There were about 300 people in the audience. Investigators, lawyers, journalists, law enforcement officials, all people who worked in similar fields. I stood at the podium and told the story. Not all of it, not the personal details, but the framework. A family that looked perfect on the outside but was rotten underneath. The careful documentation, the strategic revelation, the legal aftermath. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence, I told the audience. It wasn't even confronting my family. The hardest part was accepting that exposing the truth would cost me my relationships with people I loved, or at least people I thought I loved. I clicked to a slide showing the impact of my investigation. The charges filed, the cases reopened, the victims who received justice. But here's what I learned. The truth matters more than comfort. Justice matters more than family loyalty. And sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything familiar and building something new and better from scratch. The audience was silent, listening. If you take anything from this case, let it be this. Never let fear of consequences stop you from exposing wrongdoing. Not fear of losing your job, not fear of social repercussions, not even fear of losing your family. Because the people who are hurt by corruption and fraud, they're counting on someone to have the courage to tell the truth. And if we don't do it, who will? The applause when I finished was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people came up to talk to me, to share their own stories of investigations they'd conducted or corruption they'd exposed. Many of them had faced similar consequences: lost relationships, professional backlash, personal costs for doing the right thing. But none of them regretted it. That was the common thread. Despite everything they'd lost, they'd all do it again because they knew it mattered. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until everyone else had left before approaching me. "Your mother was right about one thing," she said. I tensed, not sure where this was going. In her letter to you, she said she was proud that you understood what integrity means. The woman smiled. "That's rare. Most people talk about integrity, but when it costs them something real, they compromise. You didn't. That's remarkable." "It didn't feel remarkable," I admitted. "It felt necessary." "That's exactly why it was remarkable." She handed me her business card. She was the director of a non-profit that supported whistleblowers and people who'd exposed corporate or government corruption. "If you ever need support, or if you know anyone else in a similar situation, reach out. What you did was brave, and you shouldn't have to face the aftermath alone." I took the card, genuinely touched. "Thank you." 2 years after that Christmas dinner, my life looked completely different from what my family had envisioned, but also completely different from what I'd imagined when I drove away from their estate that night. I'd been promoted to director of investigations at my firm. I'd helped crack several major fraud cases, including one involving a medical device company that was selling faulty implants and a pharmaceutical company that was bribing doctors to prescribe unnecessary medications. My work had directly led to regulatory changes and criminal prosecutions. I'd also started teaching a class at John Jay College of Criminal Justice on digital forensics and ethical investigation practices. The Clark family case was part of the curriculum, anonymized but still recognizable to anyone who'd followed the news. My personal life had stabilized too. The relationship I'd started with my fellow investigator had become serious. His name was David. Ironically, the same as my ex-boyfriend. But he was everything that First David hadn't been. Honest, supportive, genuinely interested in who I was rather than who he wanted me to be. When I told him about that Christmas dinner, about everything I'd done, he'd listened quietly and then said, "That must have been incredibly hard, but I'm glad you did it. The world needs people who'll stand up to corruption, even when it costs them everything." That was when I knew I loved him. We got engaged on Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years after the dinner. It was deliberate, a way of reclaiming that day, turning it from a symbol of family destruction into a symbol of new beginnings. I didn't invite anyone from my family to the wedding, not out of spite, but because we'd simply become different people living different lives. My mother was in minimum security prison, serving a 3-year sentence for fraud. My father's hedge fund had collapsed, and he was fighting multiple civil lawsuits from investors who'd lost money when his insider trading scheme was exposed. Marcus was slowly rebuilding his life, working as a compliance officer at a small firm, using his experience to help companies avoid the mistakes he'd made. Bethany had moved to California, and according to Marcus, was working as a medical consultant for a healthcare startup. Jennifer had completed her court-ordered community service and was apparently in therapy, working on her gambling addiction. They were all dealing with the consequences of their choices, just as I was dealing with the consequences of mine. My consequences just looked a lot better. The wedding was small, just close friends and a few colleagues. David's family, who'd accepted me immediately, and never once asked why my own family wasn't involved. We got married in a small venue in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, everything honest and real. During the reception, one of my friends from work, someone who'd helped me prepare the evidence for that Christmas revelation, pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something," she said. "That night changed everything for me." "What do you mean?" "I was in a similar situation with my own family. Nothing criminal, but they were toxic, constantly putting me down, making me feel like I wasn't good enough. I kept trying to maintain the relationship because I thought that's what you're supposed to do with family." She smiled. "But watching you stand up to your family, watching you choose your integrity over their approval, it gave me permission to do the same. I cut them off 6 months ago, and my life has been so much better." I hugged her, feeling the weight of what she'd shared. "I'm glad. You gave a lot of people permission to demand better," she continued. "Not just from their families, but from themselves. That presentation at the conference, it went viral in investigative circles. I know at least a dozen people who've cited your case when they were deciding whether to expose corruption they'd found. They asked themselves, would I have the courage Emma Clark had? And some of them found that courage. I thought about that a lot over the following months. I'd never intended to become any kind of symbol or inspiration. I'd just been a woman who was tired of being treated poorly by people who were far worse than they pretended to be. But maybe that was exactly what made it meaningful. I wasn't special. I wasn't uniquely brave. I was just someone who'd reached a breaking point and decided that the truth mattered more than comfort. If that could inspire other people to demand better, to stand up to corruption and abuse and hypocrisy, then maybe all the pain and loss had been worth it. 3 years after that Christmas dinner, I received a letter from one of the families involved in the Meridian Pharmaceutical case. They'd won their lawsuit. The company had been forced to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. More importantly, the CEO and several executives were facing criminal charges for their role in covering up the contamination. "None of this would have happened without you," the letter read. "When you exposed what your brother had done, when you gave us the evidence we needed to reopen the case, you gave us hope. Our daughter will never fully recover from what that medication did to her, but at least now we can afford the care she needs. At least the people responsible are being held accountable. Thank you for having the courage to stand up to your own family. Thank you for choosing justice over loyalty." I cried when I read that letter. Real, cathartic tears that I'd been holding back for 3 years, because that was what it had all been for. Not revenge, not spite, not even justice for myself. It was for people like this family, people who'd been hurt by powerful people who thought they were above consequences. I framed that letter and hung it in my office, a reminder of why the work I do matters. 5 years after that Christmas dinner, I was contacted by a producer from a major streaming service. They wanted to make a documentary about the Clark family case, about corporate fraud in elite families, about the personal cost of exposing corruption. I was hesitant at first, but after talking with David and my lawyer, I agreed, with conditions. The focus had to be on the victims and the systemic issues, not on sensationalizing my family's crimes. Any money I received for participation would go to charities that supported the people affected by corporate fraud. The documentary, when it finally aired, was called The Gift of Truth, The Emma Clark Story. I hated the title. It was too focused on me, but the content was exactly what I'd hoped for. It featured interviews with the Meridian Pharmaceutical families, with the veterans who'd been helped by the restructured charity, with investigators and lawyers who'd worked on similar cases. It also featured interviews with my brother Marcus, who spoke honestly about his crimes and the rationalization that had led him to suppress evidence. "I told myself I was just doing my job," he said on camera. "I told myself that everyone in corporate law did things like this, that it was just part of the business. But that was a lie I told myself to avoid facing what I really was. Someone who valued money and status more than human life. Emma's exposure of what I'd done, as much as it destroyed my career, saved me from becoming an even worse person. She forced me to confront the truth, and that was the greatest gift anyone's ever given me, even though it didn't feel like it at the time." The documentary was a massive success, trending on the platform for weeks, sparking conversations about corporate accountability, and the courage required to expose wrongdoing. I was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and corporate ethics seminars. And through it all, I kept working, investigating fraud, documenting corruption, helping victims find justice, because that was what mattered, not the fame or the recognition, but the actual work of holding powerful people accountable. 10 years after that Christmas dinner, I stood in front of a congressional committee. I'd been called to testify about corporate fraud investigation practices and the need for better protections for whistleblowers and investigators who exposed corruption. The most common question I get, I told the committee, is whether I regret what I did that Christmas, whether I wish I'd handled it differently, whether I miss my family, whether the cost was worth it. I paused, looking at the senators and representatives watching me. The answer is complicated. Do I wish my family had been better people who didn't need to be exposed? Of course. Do I wish I still had relationships with my parents and brother? Sometimes. But do I regret exposing their crimes? Never. Not for a single moment. I pulled out a folder of letters I'd brought with me. These are from people who were helped because I chose to tell the truth. Families who got justice. Veterans who got support. Workers who were protected from corporate malfeasance because the cases I worked on led to regulatory changes. I held up one letter in particular. This is from the daughter of the little girl who was harmed by the Meridian pharmaceutical contamination. She's 16 now. She'll never have a normal life because of what that medication did to her brain. But she has a future because her family could afford proper care after the lawsuit settlement. She wrote to thank me for giving her mother hope when there was none. I put the letters down and looked directly at the committee. That's why whistleblower protections matter. That's why we need stronger laws against corporate corruption. That's why investigators need support when they expose wrongdoing. Because every case isn't just about the powerful people who get caught. It's about the victims who get justice. It's about preventing future harm. It's about creating a society where doing the right thing doesn't require losing everything. The testimony led to new legislation strengthening whistleblower protections and increasing penalties for corporate fraud. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 15 years after that Christmas dinner, I published a book, The Gift They'll Remember Forever, a guide to exposing corruption and surviving the consequences. It wasn't a memoir, though it included my story. It was a practical guide for investigators, journalists, and potential whistleblowers, covering everything from how to gather and document evidence legally, to how to protect yourself from retaliation, to how to cope with the personal costs of telling the truth. The book became required reading in several criminal justice and journalism programs. I received thousands of emails from people who'd used its guidance to expose corruption in their own workplaces, families, or communities. One email particularly stood out. It was from a young woman named Sophie, who discovered that her father's construction company was using substandard materials in public schools, creating buildings that were unsafe for children. Using the techniques outlined in my book, she'd documented everything and reported it to authorities. The company was shut down, her father went to prison, and the schools were rebuilt to proper safety standards. I lost my family, she wrote. My mother won't speak to me. My siblings think I'm a traitor. But I prevented children from being hurt or killed in buildings that could have collapsed. I read your book before I made my decision, and it gave me the courage to do what I knew was right. Thank you for showing me that integrity matters more than family loyalty. I wrote back to Sophie, sharing my own journey, and reminding her that she'd done the right thing, that the cost was real, but so was the value of what she'd accomplished. 20 years after that Christmas dinner, I sat in my office, now the head of my own investigation firm, and received a call from an unexpected source. Emma, it's Marcus. I hadn't spoken to my brother in over a decade. We'd exchanged occasional emails, brief updates on our lives, but nothing substantial. Marcus, hi. Is everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. I actually called because I wanted to invite you to something. I'm giving a talk at Harvard Law School about legal ethics and the temptations of corporate law. I wanted to tell my story, about what I did and what happened, and I'd like you to be there, if you're willing. I was surprised. You want me there? I want to publicly acknowledge what you did, not as the person who ruined my life, but as the person who saved it. Because that's what you did, Emma. You stopped me from continuing down a path that would have led to hurting more people. You forced me to confront who I'd become and who I wanted to be. I thought about it. Send me the details. I'll try to make it. I did make it. I sat in the back of the lecture hall at Harvard Law, listening to my brother tell a room full of future lawyers about his mistakes, his crimes, and the consequences. He spoke honestly about the pressure to succeed, the temptation of money and status, the ease of rationalization. And then he talked about me. My sister Emma exposed everything I'd done. At the time, I thought she'd destroyed me out of revenge or spite. I thought she was cruel and vindictive. But I was wrong. His voice broke slightly. She did what I should have done years earlier. She told the truth, even when it cost her everything. Even when it meant losing her family. Even when it meant being hated by the people she loved. He looked up at the lecture hall, and somehow his eyes found mine in the back row. Emma, if you're out there, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having more integrity than I did. Thank you for stopping me before I hurt more people. Thank you for showing me what courage really looks like. After the lecture, we met for coffee. It was awkward at first. 2 decades of damage between us. But we found our way to honest conversation. I'm proud of what you've built, Marcus said. Your firm, your book, your advocacy work. You've helped so many people. You've done well too, I said. I heard you're running an ethics program now. Yeah, trying to prevent the next generation from making my mistakes. He smiled sadly. It doesn't erase what I did, but maybe it helps balance the scales a little. That's all any of us can do. Try to make the world a little better than we found it. We didn't become close after that meeting. Too much had happened. Too much time had passed. But we maintained a relationship, checking in occasionally, supporting each other's work from a distance. 25 years after that Christmas dinner, I was asked to give a TED Talk. The topic was the true cost of integrity and why it's worth paying. I stood on that stage, older now, grayer, carrying the weight of 2.5 decades of investigation work and advocacy, and I told the story one more time. But this time, I ended it differently. People often focus on what I lost, I said. My family, my relationships, my sense of belonging. And yes, those losses were real and painful. But let me tell you what I gained. I gained the ability to look at myself in the mirror every morning and know that I did the right thing. I gained relationships built on honesty rather than performance. I gained work that actually matters. I gained the respect of people whose respect is worth having. I gained a life built on truth instead of comfortable lies. Most importantly, I gained the knowledge that when it mattered most, when I had to choose between comfort and courage, between family loyalty and justice, between maintaining appearances and exposing truth, I made the right choice. That Christmas dinner 25 years ago was supposed to be my humiliation. Instead, it became my liberation. The gift I gave my family that night, the exposure of their crimes and hypocrisy, it was also a gift I gave myself. Freedom from their judgment, freedom from their expectations, freedom to build a life based on my own values. I paused, looking out at the audience. So yes, telling the truth cost me everything familiar, but it gave me everything meaningful. And I'd make that choice again, every single time. The applause was overwhelming. But what mattered more were the people who came up to me afterward, sharing their own stories of choosing integrity over comfort, truth over loyalty, justice over family. That night, as I flew home to New York, I thought about that Christmas dinner so many years ago. The careful preparation, the moment of revelation, the chaos that followed. And I thought about everything that had come from that choice. The victims who'd found justice, the systems that had been changed, the people who'd been inspired to tell their own truths, the relationships I'd built with people who valued the same things I did, the career I'd created doing work that actually mattered, the life I'd built on a foundation of integrity rather than appearances. My family had wanted to give me a gift that night. The gift of humiliation. The gift of being put in my place. The gift of learning to conform to their expectations. Instead, I'd given them a gift they remembered forever. The gift of truth. The gift of consequences. The gift of being held accountable for their actions. And in doing so, I'd given myself the greatest gift of all. A life lived honestly, with courage, doing work that mattered. That was worth every loss, every sacrifice, every difficult choice along the way. This story teaches us that integrity cannot coexist with comfortable lies, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable harmful behavior, even when that refusal costs us everything. When family members prioritize appearances over ethics, silence becomes complicity, and exposure becomes the only moral choice. True family isn't defined by blood or loyalty to shared secrets, but by mutual respect, honesty, and accountability. Have you ever been in a situation similar to discovering your family plotting against you? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in choosing integrity over family loyalty when that loyalty would make you complicit in wrongdoing, give it a like and subscribe for more stories like this. Let me know where you're watching from.